I went back and forth for a while about even doing this video. One, because of the amount of time it was going to take, and two, I wanted to make sure that I could really do the series justice. I'm someone who's enjoyed the Kingdom Hearts franchise since the very beginning. I was in elementary school when the first game came out, so I'm definitely someone who's grown up with the series. The whole inspiration for making this video really just came from me scrolling through YouTube. I saw a video titled, "Why Kingdom Hearts Deserves a Remake," and I thought, that'd be pretty cool. But how would they change the story? And then that evolved into, hey, if I was sitting in the writer's chair, how would I change the story? And here we are. I want to emphasize the point that this is how I would write a Kingdom Hearts remake. I'm in no way insinuating that the series of events that I'm going to lay out should replace the original game. This isn't a how I would fix Kingdom Hearts video. Think of it more through the lens of Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake. One isn't inherently better than the other, they're just different takes on the same story. I'm also really just gonna hone in on the Kingdom Hearts elements. While the Disney characters and the worlds influence the narrative, they're not really what the story is about. The story is really about Sora and his friends, the various Keyblade wielders, and the struggles that they go through. Additionally, I'm not setting out to change things just for the sake of change. If there's a scene that works great as is, I'm not gonna shoehorn something in there just so I can say I made it different. But with that being said, there may be a few pretty dramatic character changes or overall edits. Again, I'm not doing any of this frivolously. It's all to better serve the narrative that I plan to lay out for you. So, without further ado, here's how I would write a Kingdom Hearts remake. I want to take a moment to explain some of the changes I've made to the lore and the terminology in this alternate Kingdom Hearts timeline. Starting with light and darkness. These are both forms of energy, and every living creature is comprised of some quantity of one or both of them. When harnessed, light is primarily used to heal, create, and purify, while darkness is used for destruction and alteration. A good illustration of this is the types of magic they produce. Light is used for spells like Cure and Holy, while darkness is used for spells like Fire, Blizzard, and Thunder, much like white and black magic from the core Final Fantasy series. Next is hearts. Hearts are essentially souls. They're a person's essence. They're also where light and darkness are stored inside the individual. The balance of that light and darkness changes with each person, so someone like Sora might be 70% light and 30% dark, whereas Riku might be 30% light and 70% dark, and Kairi is 100% light. Hearts can vary greatly in their carrying capacity. This is why we see some individuals able to hold a tremendous amount of light or darkness inside of them, while others are much more ordinary. This scale, or metric, is referred to as heart capacity. And just like in the original story, under the right conditions, one body can hold multiple hearts. Now, we're going to talk about the Heartless. Despite the name, Heartless have hearts. A Heartless is created when a heart becomes 100% darkness. And the higher the heart's capacity, the more powerful the Heartless. This is why most Heartless are small and relatively weak, as most people can't hold much darkness inside of them before they transform. Again, someone only turns into a Heartless if their heart is filled with 100% darkness. This is why characters like Maleficent don't turn into a Heartless. Her heart might be 99.9% darkness, but as long as there's still some light left, she won't turn. Lastly, a Heartless can be turned back into the original person. However, this is an ability exclusive to the Princesses of Heart, and for the large majority of the story, they'll be completely unaware that they have this ability. Speaking of the Princesses of Heart, just like in the original story, there are 7 of them, and their hearts are 100% light. This is exceedingly rare, as every other person has some quantity of darkness inside of them. And if all 7 princesses are brought together, they have the ability to open a pathway to Kingdom Hearts, so not much changing there. Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts is a place, but not one you can travel to with traditional means. It's a pocket dimension, one where all hearts come from and all hearts return. It's also a place that's overflowing with both light and darkness. So theoretically, if someone could harness all of the energy there, they could create and destroy on a planetary or even a solar system level. This is why numerous characters throughout the story seek to control Kingdom Hearts. And one of those individuals is Ansem. In this version of the story, Ansem isn't a Heartless. He's a nobody. So let me give you the new definition of nobodies. First off, nobodies are incredibly rare, almost as rare as, say, the Princesses of Heart. When someone has an exceedingly strong will, a very high heart capacity, and their heart becomes 100% darkness, a nobody is created. To emphasize how rare they are, there won't be any grunt or low-level nobodies. The nobody enemy types from the original game will instead be receiving a darker palette swap and reclassified as Heartless. Outside of Ansem, there will only be a dozen or so nobodies. Nobodies are insanely powerful, and they can handle even the strongest Heartless with relative ease. Additionally, nobodies retain their original form, as well as their mental capacity. This helps differentiate them from the more primal Heartless. Now, back to Ansem. In the original story, there was the confusion with Ansem Seeker of Darkness and Ansem the Wise. To alleviate that confusion, I'm going to be renaming Ansem the Wise. Luckily, he already comes with another name, so I'm just going to be calling him Diz. Diz, or Darkness and Zero, isn't his real name, it's more so a title that everyone refers to him by. Like the One Above All from the Marvel Universe, or Father from Fallout 4. So when Sora meets with Leon and his friends, instead of them telling him about Ansem, they'll be telling him about Diz. To further add to the mystery of Diz, no one will actually know what his real name is. The last thing I want to touch on is the various Disney worlds. If I don't mention a specific change, you can pretty much assume that the worlds play out the same way they do in the original story. So, outside of what's on this list, things operate pretty much the same way they do in the original Kingdom Hearts. And now, we can get started. The opening hours of the game are gonna stay pretty much the same. As it stands right now, I think the story does a really great job of introducing the characters as well as setting up the adventure. My first change doesn't come until after Sora completes the first 4 worlds. In the original, there's a scene where we see the Disney villains gather around a table in Hollow Bastion. The thing that I'm going to change here is I'm going to insert Ansem. After the meeting concludes, I want there to be a scene where Maleficent and Ansem talk privately. I think this will better help establish their roles, where Maleficent is the figurehead and Ansem's really the one pulling the strings. Next, we're gonna go to the scene where Riku and Sora reunite for the first time in Traverse Town. Here, we'll have Riku challenge Sora to a friendly sparring match. I really want to establish Riku as Sora's rival, so kind of like in the Pokemon games where your rival will challenge you at various points in the story, I want there to be more moments like that with Sora and Riku, where they're constantly kind of gauging each other's power. And once the fight's over, Riku and Sora will still go their separate ways. Again, leaving the events of the Disney worlds mostly intact, I'm gonna pick back up after Agrabah. Here, there's a scene where Hades and Maleficent are talking to Riku about capturing Jasmine. After this conversation finishes, I want there to be a scene where Ansem pulls Riku aside. I want to use this moment to establish that Ansem and Riku already have some level of familiarity, but also to show that Ansem is the one who's teaching Riku how to use the powers of darkness. In the original story, we see Riku's abilities progress over the game, but we're never really shown him training or practicing. This also helps to develop the mentor-mentee relationship between Riku and Ansem. That's going to play a role in the story later down the line. The next place I want to go is Monstro. I'm gonna keep the whole segment about Riku capturing Pinocchio. Only this time, before Riku runs off with him, he's gonna challenge Sora to another duel. Regardless of how the fight goes from, say, a gameplay standpoint, Riku will still run off with Pinocchio and tease Sora about the difference in their abilities. We'll then pick back up with the first encounter against the Parasite Cage. Instead of a battle, Riku will just one-shot the Heartless using the Dark Firaga technique that he's been practicing with Ansem. While Sora, Donald, and Goofy look on in amazement, Riku will again comment on the difference in their abilities. This is all to further illustrate the widening gap between Riku and Sora. Sora will manage to track Riku down just like he does in the original story. I love the standoff that these two have here, so I'm going to be leaving that intact. Their conversation will be interrupted by a second, stronger Parasite Cage before Riku slips away into a dark portal. After Sora, Donald, and Goofy manage to escape Monstro, we'll pick back up with Riku meeting with Maleficent. In the original story, this is the point where Maleficent gives Riku the ability to control the Heartless. I'd like to add in a follow-up conversation with Ansem. Here, Ansem tells Riku that controlling the Heartless is useful, but that he should focus on increasing his own strength. This is important because it helps establish that there's different ways to use darkness. Some are more effective and some are more dangerous than others. This is something that was touched on in the original story, but not really emphasized to a great deal. After this, the story remains mostly the same, until Neverland. Just like in the original story, Sora will get captured and he'll have to fight his way through the ship. When Sora manages to corner Riku, Riku will summon a Heartless to fight Sora. However, instead of immediately retreating, Riku will stick around to see how the fight plays out. After Sora wins, Riku retreats with Kairi's body, and he leaves Captain Hook behind to deal with Sora. Sora and his friends defeat Captain Hook, and then Tinkerbell leads them to the clock tower. But when they arrive, Riku is waiting for them. Riku tells Sora that the last Heartless he summoned was weak, but this one won't go down so easy. And then we have Riku summoning the Clock Tower Phantom. At first, Riku is really boastful, but soon realizes that he has no control over the Heartless. The lack of control scares Riku and causes him to flee. And because of this event, Riku decides that he's never going to summon another Heartless. In the original story, Riku only ever summons Heartless while he's on Neverland, but then never does it again. It's never explained why. So, this scene helps to fill in the gap. Sora and his friends manage to defeat the Clock Tower Phantom, and then we pick back up with Riku talking to Maleficent. Riku tells Maleficent that he doesn't want to use the Heartless anymore, and he wants to get stronger on his own. Maleficent agrees to help, and brings out even more of Riku's power. Shortly after, Ansem enters the room. He tells Riku that even though he has more power, it won't do him any good unless he learns how to focus it. And then we can have this really epic scene where Ansem teaches Riku how to enter his iconic dark mode. This is one of Riku's most distinctive looks, and yet in the original story, the transformation sequence is less than a second. So I felt like it was necessary to spend more time with it, just to emphasize how important the transformation is to Riku's character. I'm imagining something almost Dragon Ball-esque, like when Gohan transforms into Super Saiyan 2 for the first time. We then catch back up with Sora and his friends as they arrive in Hollow Bastion. I really enjoy the segment with the Beast and Sora losing the Keyblade, so I'm not going to be touching any of that stuff. The one thing I am going to tweak though is Donald and Goofy. I always felt like it was so uncharacteristic of them to just leave Sora in that moment. So in my version of events, I think that I'm going to have them stick with Sora. And this really actually doesn't change a whole lot, because once they meet back up with Riku, you can still have Goofy come in for the save. And there's no way I could ever remove my friends or my power. It's one of the most iconic lines in the entire series, so this whole sequence, leaving it as is. After Sora manages to get the Keyblade back, Riku runs off and meets up with Ansem. Riku gets one last power boost. The only difference is, in my version of events, Ansem doesn't take over his body. Ansem doesn't need Riku's body, because he has his own. We'll touch more on that later. The story then carries on like the original, with Sora defeating Maleficent and meeting up with Riku for one last showdown. Of course, in this version of events, Riku isn't possessed. He's fighting Sora because he's bitter. He's insecure about losing to him and everything that's happened with Kairi. Sora manages to beat Riku again, even with the power boost. Then, Riku reverts back to his regular clothes and passes out on the ground. And just like in the original story, Sora uses Riku's Keyblade to release Kairi's heart. Kairi wakes up just in time to watch Sora fade away. But before she can process what's really going on, Ansem appears. We then get the face reveal. He takes off the robe, and we see the Ansem that we're all familiar with. Ansem begins to approach Kairi. But just out of frame, we see Riku mustering enough strength to get up off of the ground. Riku then uses the little energy he has to open a dark portal. Before Ansem can react, Riku tackles him into the portal, sending both of them into the darkness. But it gives Kairi a chance to escape with Donald and Goofy. This sequence will have a deep impact on Kairi, because in a matter of moments, she's watched both of her best friends sacrifice themselves right in front of her. After Kairi manages to escape, we have the whole sequence of events with Sora turning into a Heartless and then turning back from a Heartless. I'm not going to be making changes to any of that because I think it works quite well as is. From here, the sequence of events will play out pretty much the same, with Sora's second trip to Hollow Bastion and confronting Ansem at the end of the world. Although, his conversation with Ansem is gonna go pretty differently. This is where we'll learn a lot about Ansem, where he comes from, and what his real motives are. Ansem starts by apologizing to Sora for everything that's happened with Riku. He tells Sora that he wanted to mentor Riku because Riku reminded him a lot of himself, and that he's actually disappointed that Riku's now lost in the realm of darkness. Ansem goes on to say that the only reason he worked with Maleficent was because he needed her help to reach Kingdom Hearts. When Sora asks why Ansem needs Kingdom Hearts, Ansem replies that it's the only way he can be free. Ansem is on the run. He tells Sora that he's being pursued by an organization that's far more dangerous than he is. He's tired of running and believes the only way he can be safe is to have control of Kingdom Hearts. Ansem acknowledges that Sora can't allow him to have his way, and that their meeting has to end in conflict. And then, their battle begins. Another major difference between the original Ansem and this one is this Ansem doesn't fight using the Guardian. Oh! He still fights using the powers of darkness, but just in different ways. The final battle with Ansem will play out mostly the same, except for in his final form, I want to do something a little bit different. Instead of Ansem becoming that big, heartless spaceship thing, this version, he's going to use his powers to merge with the island itself. Kind of like Oogie Boogie when he turns into the giant tower, but even on a larger scale than that. This makes it so that Sora's home is now his final enemy. Just the gameplay possibilities and all the cool physics stuff that you could do with that, but that's not what this video is about. But cool side note. After Sora manages to defeat Ansem's final form, in a last-ditch attempt, Ansem opens a giant portal and sucks everything down into the realm of darkness. Sora opens his eyes and sees Ansem reaching out for the door to Kingdom Hearts. And just like in the original story, as soon as the doors open, Ansem is showered with light and fades away. A heart leaves his body and flies through the doors. And just on the other side of the doors, we see that Ansem's heart has made its way to Riku, the only person he's ever made a connection with. We then get the ending scene of the game, with Sora and Riku working together to close the door to Kingdom Hearts. From there, the ending plays out just like the original. Sora and Riku close the door, Mickey makes his appearance, Destiny Islands comes back, and the journey continues. So, the door is closed, the day is saved. If you want to know how the story continues, you're gonna have to come back for the next video.